Good morning. This morning's reading, the Old Testament Hebrew Bible reading, is from Amos, chapter 8, verses 4 through 7. Hear this, you that trample on the needy, and bring to ruin the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath so that we may offer wheat for sale? We will make the ephah small and the shekel great, and practice deceit with false balances, buying the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, and selling the sweepings of the wheat. The Lord has sworn by the pride of Jacob, surely I will never forget any of their deeds. And now the gospel reading from Luke, chapter 16, verses 1 through 13. Then Jesus said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Give me an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer. Then the manager said to himself, what will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes. So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, how much do you owe the master? He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly and make it 50. Then he asked another, and how much do you owe? He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Here ends the reading. Thanks be to God.
May the circle be unbroken. Thank you. How do I follow that? It's a real pleasure to be here and to worship with you today. What a gorgeous liturgy and community. So thank you all for inviting me to this beautiful place. So here we are on the threshold of a new season, a new year, time of transition and new beginnings. Kids are starting school, people move, new jobs begin, leaves fall, summer fades, and maybe the pandemic is easing off. To mask or not to mask, that is the question. When will this ever be done? But we're on a threshold. We're on, hopefully, a turning point. I know your church community is going through a shift in leadership. Dave was a friend of mine, and it's a pleasure to know him, and I know that it's difficult and painful to see him go, but also a time of new beginnings. It's wonderful to have Katrina back. So I wish you well on this journey. Irish writer John O'Donohue writes this about thresholds and transitions. He writes, to acknowledge and cross a new threshold demands courage and also a sense of trust in whatever is emerging. It takes only a couple of seconds for a life to change irreversibly. Suddenly you stand in a completely strange ground and a new course of life has to be embraced. Especially at such times we desperately need blessing and protection. Blessing and protection. Our parable this morning, this wonderful parable that Jesus tells, is about a crooked character going through a desperately big transition. He's about to get fired with no one to bless him. He's afraid he's going to starve to death, and so he needs serious protection to survive. Jesus uses this grifter's dilemma to teach us how to be wise about creating spiritual security and wealth and growth. In this sharp parable, he cautions us to be smart and skillful, not just with our money, but also with our souls and faith and community. And thank you, Bill, for that wonderful stewardship message, because that is the heart of this gospel message today, is the alchemy of turning money, possessions, worldly things into spiritual things, like friendship, like blessing, like protection. He tells this story about a guy in trouble with his boss. And here's another way of envisioning this as told by John Sumwalt. There was a rich bookie who had an accountant who was accused of mismanaging his business affairs. And the bookie called in the accountant and said, "Hey man, what's this I hear about you? Turn in the books. You're fired." The accountant thought, what should I do? I won't qualify for unemployment. I'm too proud to go on welfare. I know what I'll do. I'll make sure that enough people owe me that I don't have to worry when I start looking for another job. And so he called in all of the bookie's clients one by one. "How did you do on your last bet?" he asked the first. "I lost $3,000, the man told him. "Well, let me check on the computer," the accountant said. "That's what I thought. There was a mistake in the point spread on that game. You only owe $1,500. The next man was in arrears on several losing bets. "How much do you owe altogether?" the accountant asked him. $10,000, came the reply. The accountant smiled and said, "Pay me 50 cents on the dollar and the debt is clear." And so it went until the accountant had enough money in his people in his debt so that he could be certain of landing another job. When the rich bookie found out what his former employee had done, he bought him a drink and congratulated him on his shrewdness. The guy knew he was going to get fired. He made too many fumbles and dumb tricks and cut corners, and the birds came home to roost. And so he reached out to his boss's creditors and tried to make friends by using his boss's money so he could open doors for future employment. He turned money into friendship and safety, blessing and protection. The unfortunate thing is it was completely immoral and unlawful, and Jesus is using this as a counter-example. He's saying, basically how to turn our resources as smartly and shrewdly as this guy turns his boss's money into something spiritual. The people of God should be even more canny and clever about spirituality than crooks and embezzlers and crafty grifters. He's asking us to be sharp about our spiritual lives, to be creative and industrious, to create a way of life that enriches us beyond anything money can buy. If this con artist is smart enough to get ahead in the money world in spite of his selfishness, then how much more shrewdly should faith-filled people be? Jesus cracks this joke to show us a new way of seeing the world, so enthralled by money. Money is enthralling. It's compelling. It's also funny. Milton Berle, the old comedian, illustrated this. He jokes, "Money won't buy happiness. Money won't buy love. Money won't buy you health. But the way I see it is, give the money to me and I'll rent them." There are more important things in life than a little money. A lot of money. Money isn't really that important. Is a guy with $50 million happier than a guy with $48 million? No. So Milton Berle and most of our society sees money at the absolute heart of everything. It's all about money. Money is the source of all happiness, no substitutes. It's the only measure of status, value, and self-esteem. It's very persuasive, offering security in a chaotic world, pleasures, shelter, health, good food, toys, access to travel, entertainment, gadgets, not to mention freedom and options not available without it. It's hard to argue with that. But we also know that if it's our only source of satisfaction and esteem, then it comes up short. We know people who have lots of money and yet are still pretty miserable. It can't prevent death or illness or depression or accidents. Luck can turn south even with lots of cash. Jesus tells a parable about a farmer who has lots of extra grain, and he says, I'm going to build more barns. So he builds another barn, and he fills it up, and he says, I can eat, drink, and be merry. And that evening, he dies. So Jesus asks the question, what is your treasure most useful for? Too often, our treasures rule over our lives in unhealthy ways. The story goes that the Lord appeared to a farmer and granted him 3 wishes, but the catch was that whatever the Lord gave to him, he would give twice, God would give that twice to his neighbor. And so the farmer was thrilled, and so he asked for 100 head of cattle, and he was like overjoyed to see 100 new cattle in his field, but then he looked over at his neighbor's yard who had 200. And that was discouraging. But then he asked for 100 more acres of land, and there was extra land for his farm, and he was overjoyed. And then he saw that his neighbor had 200 more acres. And so he was really, really upset. And so he wished for his neighbor to become blind in one eye. And God wept. So comparing ourselves to others with more money is one of our major habits in our life. It leads us down paths that take us away from God. It doesn't matter how much we make or how lovely our home may be or how great a car we drive. If others on the block or in the neighborhood are making more or driving a fancier car, it doesn't quite feel as satisfying. Our scripture this morning speaks of fostering inner wealth, spiritual contentment, investing in holy ground rather than just cold, hard cash. For Jesus, the priority is the realm of God. It's cultivating and claiming a common way of life of inner joy and close connections with those we love, open-hearted generosity, faith in God's grace. He encourages us to foster a spiritual life that endures even after death, wealth of soul that sustains us even in the hardest of times, an inner peace that no amount of gold can buy. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consume, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So what do we treasure most? What do we most cherish and put at the center of our lives? So that's what we need to examine most deeply. What do we value most? What do we love? What do we long for? And then we need to get really good at these things and cultivate them wisely. Really sharp about cultivating them. The problem is that our spiritual lives can get clogged up and bogged down. It's helpful to widen our lens. After all, our Earth home is nestled within billions of galaxies and is filled with enormous mystery and beauty and wonder. And so cultivating spiritual wisdom and depth allows us to tap into clear waters to refresh our vision and inspire our souls. A story helps us to envision this. A village high in the mountains was prosperous and beautiful, ringed by snow-capped peaks with brightly colored homes decked with flowers. In the village square was a stone fountain that showered crystal clear waters into a great basin that was used by the villagers as their source of drinking water. This refreshing water ran in a bright stream through the town, flowing down from the hills to this fountain. One day, the village elders were gathered for their yearly discussion about the finances of the town and how to manage the next year's plans. One item on the budget was a line item that read, "Keeper of the Springs." It wasn't a large amount, but no one could remember what it was for. A stooped, white-haired man said that he had seen an old hermit in the mountains who went from spring to spring cleaning out debris, but no one had met this man and no one was sure what he did. So they voted unanimously to cut this item from the budget for the next year. No one thought anything of this until one day a child complained that the water she was drinking was dirty. People noticed the village fountain was flagging, the water was cloudy. Little by little, the crystal streams that flowed through the town became muddy and clogged, and the fountain's water blackened, oozing muck, and then stopped. People were furious and turned to the elders, who realized what they had done, and they called on a relative of the keeper of the spring to find him and beg him to return to work. They raised his salary and urged him to tend to the springs. Once he'd begun, quickly the streams and fountain in the village flowed clear and refreshing once again. So how do we do this? How do we clear the springs of our souls? How do we open our hearts to the wonder and beauty of this universe? What practices can grow our spiritual assets, our inner satisfaction and joy, our strength of soul, our awe and wonder, our compassion for family and friends and even strangers? What daily investments can we make to increase our security, even in dire illness or loneliness, depression, or facing death? That's what Jesus is asking us to be savvy about. How can we up our spiritual game so it matures over time into a profound source of contentment and joy? Do we have to give up our work and homes and families and go meditate on a mountaintop? No. There are dozens and thousands of ways to make our souls sing. Regular soul-building exercises are all around us to offer depth and refreshment. You're undoubtedly already doing many in your own lives. Walking in the woods, reading, meditating, praying, painting, therapy, cooking, singing, stargazing, crafting, caring for pets, gathering with friends, experiencing meaningful art. These give space to grow and clarify heart and mind and feed the soul. Our jobs can be spiritually enriching if done with joy and with good colleagues. Our family lives can be deeply satisfying with gentleness and care, understanding and compassion. Our souls will tell us what pathways to follow to discover our truest selves, to turn base material into gold. I heard a story told by a spiritual teacher, Ram Dass, that he was giving a talk once about meditation, about techniques for meditation. And as he was speaking, he noticed that there was a woman in one of the seats in front who was just nodding her head and just beaming and really excited about what he was saying. And he went up to her after the talk and he said, what kind of meditation practice do you use and what do you do? And she said, no, I knit. So knitting can be a wonderful source of meditation, returning to stillness, returning to your true self. I know that today I'm actually preaching to the choir, not just this choir, but you, because you have made a very smart spiritual move by coming to church. It's a wise investment in spiritual wealth. You're enriched by this community of faith, its authentic vision, grounded in ancient wisdom, with a long history of integrity. This community offers friendship and dialogue, security and joy. It values children and older folks, teaches wisdom, worships creatively, lifts the soul with song and prayer, cares for those in need. Here you celebrate the joys of equality and justice and sharing, compassion, and fun. It's a treasure hard to find elsewhere. So let's be smart about making all of this happen. Let's be smarter than the crook Jesus talks about in the parable. Let's get to work fashioning spiritual treasures for ourselves, our families, our communities. Let's be as savvy about our soul work as we are about our investments and careers and consumption. After all, what other treasure really lasts? What offers blessing and protection? Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Let it be so. Amen.